Hello newcomers and old, I am Carl Scratches, and thank you for joining me to yet again take a look at what I found. You know, when I reviewed Cannibal Holocaust, I summarized it by saying it's a film for people who find the sensation of a gut punch meaningful. And when you invite in hell, it swallows you whole, leaving you cold and empty. And for some people, this is an immensely liberating sensation to not have to deal with the bullshit inside, to not have to move past the anxiety and sadness and bitterness and or whatever else you might be feeling. Anyway, too much of a strong medication it can be detrimental, so it's always nice with a change of pace. I mean, after all, found footage isn't just about horror. There is comedy, there's drama, there's action, there's a lot of variety to the genre. So I think in these times maybe we all need a change of pace. Maybe we all need some levity. Something light-hearted and fun, something to remind us that things will turn out alright. And something to fill us with the youthful glow of nostalgia and remind us that, and fill us with hope that maybe, just maybe, there is hope for a better tomorrow.
Just big enough to be cool.
Unfortunately, I don't have Project X, so how about Man Bites Dog? Or as it's known in France, c'est arrivé près de chez vous. France has had a very powerful presence in horror, with movies like Frontiers, Martyrs, and Inside, The Land of Romance has produced a remarkable number of hard-hitting nightmares. In this case, a small film crew follows a local serial killer in his day-to-day life, intending to present it as faithfully as possible. However, as time goes on, they get all the more chummy with the murderous criminal, and gradually they become all the more complicit in his crimes. This is one of those movies that, even if you're not a fan of found footage, you've probably heard of it at some point. I mean, it was part of the Criterion collection, it was listed in 1001 Movies You Need to See Before You Die, which I actually think I have a copy of somewhere, but it's also one of those movies that is so fantastically graphic that it upset a lot of people. I mean, most notably, it actually was banned in Sweden. Oops. Let's watch it before the police knocks on my door. The movie opens and... oh, we're getting right to it. This is Benoit, or as he's called most of the film, Ben, played by
Benoit Poelvoorde.
He's a murderous thief the film crew is following around in his day-to-day life for an unspecified project. And his name is way too difficult for me to say repeatedly, so I'm just gonna call him Benoit Peepee. Because reasons. The crew isn't important right now, so I won't bother with them. But what is important is how disconnected Ben actually is from his murders.
Tu vois, il y a un barème quand tu laisses un corps, c'est-à-dire tu fais 3 fois son poids, normalement un homme moyen, comme cette victime-ci, c'est 3 fois son poids.
Instantly establishing Ben has a lot of experience killing people, he has no qualms about killing people, and there is kind of a comedic tint to this film. I mean, hearing Ben discuss body disposal like he's talking about the weather, it's a little bit ridiculous. He don't care, so neither do we. On another note, this movie was filmed in the 90s and set in the 90s, so I'm not sure why it's in black and white. But it does lend a kind of eerie aesthetic to the film, making it all the more laughable. Murder is a job, after all, not an identity. We can't judge Peepee by what he does for a living. Peepee's a nice guy with a loving family. It's Grandpa Peepee and Grandma Peepee, played by Hector and Nelly Papait, and his mama, Jacqueline, whose full name is Jacqueline Poelvoorde Papa. That's a mouthful to say. Reason. It's fun to see how he interacts with his family. None of them have nothing but praise to give the man, and what a nice man he is. It's a joke that starts with a punchline, and it's deliciously dark and twisted.
Il était affectueux, c'est genre, il riait tout le temps, tout le temps, tout le temps.
Mais comme tu dis, il était
Mais papa, mais non, mais tu me comprends.
You may notice the actors are actually really good in this film. and that's because it's Benoit's actual family on camera. The film crew decided to film Benoit together with his family, so their interactions are 100% legitimate. And they didn't tell them what kind of movie they were actually making. That must have been a fun reveal. Especially as he murders a postman in the next scene. I gotta say, I love how the ambient noise makes it seem like a semi-busy street, and yet not one person is coming out to help. Ben tells the film crew a bit about his procedure. Killing postmen lets him discover victims by going through their mail, and he prefers pensioners because, unlike young couples, they always have money. How he hasn't been caught yet, I don't know, but it's France, so I'm assuming the police are on strike. Everyone's busy minding their own business, letting the industrious worker man carry on with his craft. But that is a lot of murder all at once. Is seriously no one minding this? It ties in with an underlying theme of this movie. Ben commits murder, but he's not depicted as a murderer. It's not an identity, it's just what he does for a living, if that makes sense. And when you distance the man from the action, it no longer seems to reflect on him. Basically, just because his job hurts people doesn't mean he's a bad guy. He's just an average working man, and murder, even though terrible, is just a thing that happens, and so long as it doesn't intrude upon your life, you don't need to be concerned about it. None of this is said out loud in the film. It's only implied with how the characters interact with each other. The camera crew is completely blasé about the murders because they're not actually involved in the murders, they're just observing them, so they're not... Let's let the movie have that discussion for us. And Pee-Pee, he's completely blasé about the murders because it isn't personal to him. It's just a job. And I'm sure some people will find this terrifying, but honestly, I just find it kind of funny. Having committed a lot of murder in one go, Pee-Pee regales the camera crew with his thoughts about love and women, before telling them how he used to be called the Octopus, because he could move every part of his body individually.
Et alors, j'en ai un autre qui bouge, mais celui-là je ne le montre pas au caméra. Non, coupe ça, imbécile. I'm strangely liking this guy. Oh fuck, I'm gonna have to eat those words, aren't I? In the next scene over, it turns out, as Pee-Pee kills a black watchman at a construction site, revealing he's fucking racist as well. I'm not gonna show that because I like having a YouTube channel, but I just find it really funny how he starts spouting all this hillbilly bob bullshit while pretending he's not being racist as all fuck, and at the same time somehow includes capitalism in that as well. How fucking French isn't that? No matter what it is, it's always Mr. Moneybags' fault. The next day, Ben takes the crew to a block of primarily senior citizens and goes on a rant about the nightmare that is functionalist architecture and the red bricks of the buildings. A color choice Ben considers a disgrace because red is the color of violence. Alors que le fléau de notre société, et tout le monde s'accorde à le dire, est la violence, ils vont te foutre des briques rouges. What is this guy on? I mean, 1 minute he's got opinions on the decadence of society, and the next... Pee-Pee, are you the Joker? I'm asking because this scene is in equal parts horrifying and funny. Pee-Pee invites them all in to an elderly lady, claiming to be doing a report on loneliness in high-rise apartments. The trusting old lady lets them in. Pee-Pee asks her some questions, we all know what's happening. When she's distracted, he pulls out a gun, leans in, and then screams in her ear until her aging heart gives out. He literally scares her to death! It's so out of nowhere, ridiculous and cruel, and yet he's completely distanced from it. I mean, you can't help but laugh out of sheer discomfort. It's not a random act of violence. Pee-Pee searches the apartment and finds cash hidden under the old lady's tablecloth and mattress. With her fortune made, Pee-Pee invites the lot of them for mussels to celebrate, but the crew seems strangely reticent. They blame obligations and places to be, but it's clear the real reason they can't go is because they don't want to hang out with Pee-Pee.
Bien gentil, hein?
Viens avec moi, là.
I just watched this guy kill an old woman for the money in her mattress, but somehow I think the film crew are the assholes for not wanting to hang out with him. How the fuck did that happen? Eventually, Pee-Pee accepts they're not gonna go have dinner together, and with his brow lowered, he leaves.
Rémi, André m'a laissé entendre tout à l'heure que vous avez quelques problèmes pour terminer le film et pour acheter la pellicule.
Wait a minute. What happened between shots here? This wasn't me. 1 minute, Pee-Pee is walking away. The next shot, they're all at the restaurants together. What happened here? You know what? I actually kind of like this. It feels like they turned off the camera when it wasn't necessary to film anymore, so we're left to guess what happened between shots. I like that because it feels more natural and less contrived than keeping the camera on for absolutely everything. Pee-Pee does his best to make the crew feel at ease, promising to share the spoils and being as friendly as can be. Then all of a sudden he rises up to recite some poetry for everyone there. It's quite pretty, but I suspect it sounds better in French. Also, you know how I keep calling him Pee-Pee?
Les méduses amères, et les algues pourpres, et les goémons d'hiver.
Reason. Pee-Pee has had a bit much excitement for one day and starts vomiting all over the table, forcing the crew to drive him home. The next day they meet a friend of Pee-Pee's called Valerie, a classy young lady with fine tastes she happily introduces Pee-Pee to.
C'est une très belle exposition suédoise. T'as regardé, Rémi? Très intéressant, les Suédois. Ils ont une sensibilité à fleur de peau.
Why? Merci avec you! Valerie seems to be aware of what Pee-Pee does for a living, but doesn't seem to mind much, as all she says about it is everyone's got to eat. I guess the bit where no one gave a flying foul was neither a goof nor a joke. This is an interesting side to Pee-Pee, as his interesting culture appears very genuine. He met Valerie when she was about 12, and despite the unsavory implication, he doesn't seem to be sleeping with her. So he's a murderous racist, but not a pedophile. Rick Cloud. And suddenly he's terrifying again. To hammer home that point, we cut to Pee-Pee holding up a cab and chasing a random other motorist down a factory district. Who this guy is and why this is happening is not explained, leaving me to assume it's completely random and just for fun.
Tu trouves pas que ça sent bizarre ici? Ça sent la trouille, Rémi. On se rapproche, tu sais. La Lali est pour bientôt.
You went from murder is a job to murder is a pastime. You're making me look like a fool here. What started as a fast chase becomes a slow, tense hunt among the industry ruins, as Pee-Pee and his crew stalks the terrified man. The extreme contrast between black and white adds all the more intensity to the bestial proceedings, but every now and again the movie remembers it's supposed to be funny, and has Ben break the tension by suddenly giving him all his poetic attention to some pigeons, and suddenly finding he's lost his ID bracelet.
Surtout eu du mal à la voler, hein? Un gosse qui aura le même prénom que moi, je retrouverai pas ça deux fois, hein? Je le sais, j'ai acheté avec le père.
This is more ridiculous situation funny than haha joke funny, but I can just close caption this. You are looking for a man to kill for no reason whatsoever, and it actually means so little to you, you would rather look at the pretty birds, and all of a sudden you decide to start looking for a piece of jewelry that you both bought with your father and stole from some kid. You seem a little bit confused. Are you the Joker? The main source of entertainment in this film comes from Pee-Pee himself, not the situations he's involved in. So even though the hunt is interrupted to look for his damn bracelet, it doesn't feel like it's interrupting. You just end up wondering where they're going with this. And maybe smile a bit at the ridiculousness of it. Maybe. But there is another thing I'd like to observe.
Ouais. Non, ici, je vois rien du tout, hein.
The reason the sound is all messed up is because Ben roped the film crew into looking for the bracelet with him, and Patrick, the sound guy, wandered off. I've never seen this in found footage, mostly because most modern cameras have built-in microphones, but it made me realize most of the Foley work in most modern found footage films is corrective. It's balanced, it's enhanced, it's edited professionally. But in this film, they kept in the mistakes, making it seem all the more real. Especially when the sound guy lands on the mic! Unexpectedly, the man PP is chasing has a weapon of his own, and when he became cornered, he fired at the first person he saw, which happened to be the sound guy Patrick. And there is actually a lot of guns in this movie, so I did a bit of research, and according to Wikipedia, no civilian may carry any weapons in a public space, but a special form allows a civilian to apply for a 1-year carry license, which allows them to carry a handgun and a maximum of 50 rounds if they are exposed to exceptional risks to their life. So it sounds like they just got really unlucky that this specific guy apparently was one of those people. Or maybe not.
Vite, je suis désolé pour votre copain. C'est un accident.
Additionally, individuals cannot own more than 12B categorized firearms, cannot own more than 10 magazines for a given weapon, and store more than 1,000 rounds per weapon. I.e., if you have one 9mm pistol, you can store up to 1,000 rounds of 9mm, but if you own two 9mm pistols, you can store up to 2,000 rounds of 9mm. What the fuck?! Moving on, director Remy is quite upset at the loss of his sound guy, but not enough to not help PP put a body in the trunk. The mood is despondent at the bar that night, so Ben provides the conversation, iterating how successful, respectable people make headlines, but those barely scraping by is largely ignored by newspapers.
Tu tues une baleine, t'auras les écolos, t'auras Greenpeace, t'auras le commandant Cousteau sur le dos. Mais d'ici ma bande sardine, j'aime autant te dire qu'on te mettra en boîte, hein.
Between the principle of murder as an income and what he just said about no one caring about the lower classes, you may notice some subtle commentary in this film. Going back to the movie's title, C'est arrivé près de chez vous, and I know I'm butchering that, I'm sorry. It literally means it happened near your home, to reference the hidden cruelty and barbarism going on right under people's noses, and yet no one seems to mind all that much. Man bites dog, on the other hand, refers to a saying in journalism that basically means something uncommon, such as a man biting a dog, is more newsworthy than something common, such as a dog biting a man, even if they overall are pretty similar. So what does this movie show us? It shows us a man who, for all intents and purposes, seem pretty normal and even likable, yet he commits daily atrocities for an income. And no one seems to care. There is a lot that can be read into that, and maybe I am reading too much into it, but I just want you to have that little mind worm burrowing at the back of your head for the places the movie is about to take us. One of the crew suggests PP is afraid of biting off more than he can chew, and that's why he only goes after small fish. To which PP responds it's because he doesn't like making a fuss, but he can go to a nicer neighborhood anytime he wants. So, after some time has passed to find a new sound guy, that's what they do.
Regarde-moi ça. Dans 10 ans, cette petite garce sucera des bites comme sa mère. Oh.
Okay, asshole! Why do I find crudeness more offensive than murder?
Comme n'importe qui. Elle va se calmer.
What even happened there? I mean, I assume she went into shock, but you can't reliably induce shock just by punching someone. You're more likely to knock them out if you try. Or actually, you're more likely to not do anything except piss them off and then send them running. And wasn't this movie supposed to be realistic? The home invasion scene is much more uncomfortable than the slightly edgy action film we've had thus far. Particularly as PP does it mostly to prove a point, and his attempts to make it fun only makes it more disturbing.
André, Rémi, ça ne me rappelle rien, ça. Le vieux fusil. Philippe Noiret. Bon film, ça.
The scene moves firmly from fun to horrifying horror when it turns out the family had a kid, And as established previously, Pee-Pee has no moral restraints about murdering a kid as well. And it's one thing to hear someone say they've murdered children, and it's much different to actually see it. With that said, I won't show it. I won't even describe it, because I think it would be very tasteless of me to do that. I applaud the movie for staying true to its gritty realism and the point it's trying to make, but as a reviewer, I have to decide what is and isn't relevant to show within my review. If I did my usual shtick of describing the thing as it happens, I feel I would be making light of something that is very serious and very upsetting to a lot of people, myself included. I am not the movie. I'm just a guy making my opinions known, hoping to entertain you for a while, and I don't see any way to spin murdering a child as entertainment. The movie doesn't even try to do that. The scene is meant to be upsetting because it makes its pointlessness more powerful. There is no loose cash in that house, meaning they committed the murder for nothing. I say they because the only reason they... I say they because the only reason they hit that house at all was because the film crew asked Ben to. And I wouldn't say... I know I say I wouldn't describe it, but this actually is relevant. When Ben murdered the child, Remy helped him by holding the child down. The film crew has been complicit in Ben's crimes since the very beginning by just not intervening. However, up until now, you could have had discussions about whether or not they are as guilty as Ben or not, considering they were only watching, but now that line is very much being crossed. So far the movie started fun, then got tense, and now it's uncomfortable. If it goes on like this, it'll be absolutely soul-destroying by the end. The crew is running out of money, so Ben offers them some of his, which he hides in an abandoned building. They also have a new sound guy called Franco. I didn't mention his name earlier because it didn't seem important. Now, I've heard the constant death of the sound guy being described as a running gag in this film. I don't get it. The film briefly returns to fun as it transitions into an action movie. An unknown gunman is shooting at them through the decrepit roof of the building. There's action, there's thrills, there's lights, and... he fell at the speed of sound there. The chase concludes in a rundown stairwell, where it turns out it was another murderous criminal hoping to strike big. And he came with a surprise!
Oh bah merde alors. Une équipe. Vous les connaissez?
Another film crew was following another murderer. Okay, that is brilliant! It's also another 3 bodies, but who cares about them? We got more important things to watch, such as Grandpa Pee-Pee telling the story of how he sold Brigitte Bardot's panties, and Ben watching some home movies of his grand-aunt dancing bare-chested in a ring with other girls.
Mais quel charme ce film d'époque, hein?
Oh yes, very charming. A lot of this feels like filler to me, but as it still treads the line between uncomfortable and funny, if you have a sense of dark humor, it doesn't feel out of place in a movie that is largely without a plot.
Ça suffit, hein? Tu vas pas recommencer, hein?
Amis du cinéma, petite rectification.
We have a comic book character in Sweden called Arne Anka. He's an obnoxious twit that fashions himself a philosopher and artist. Obviously, I read him religiously as a kid. And I just realized he must be inspired by this guy.
Quelle sale gueule! Tu peux avoir rêvé quand tu ris! C'est incroyable!
Seeing this guy being chummy again isn't easing my discomfort, it's making me anxious. I just keep waiting for the levee to break and terrible things to happen. And in the very next scene we're back to uncomfortable, as Ben orders them all 4 little Gregorys, or as it's called in the English sub, 4 dead baby boys. The drink is made from what appears to be about 1/3 gin, 2/3 tonic, and an olive tied to a sugar cube with a bit of string. You drop the package into the glass, and the sugar cube will make the olive sink down to the bottom, but the sugar will also start to melt, so eventually the olive will rise up to the surface. While he mixes these drinks, Ben quizzes the crew on the ballast ratio to weigh down the corpse of a child. So the symbolism here is pretty obvious. And if you don't find this incredibly offensive and tasteless, let me explain something. In French, the drink is called Little Gregory, in reference to the murder of Gregory Villemin, a real murder that took place in 1984, where a 4-year-old child was found with his body tied in a river, suggesting it had first been weighed down. Now you better find this incredibly offensive and tasteless. Also, if you've seen this film before and you paid attention in the beginning, the fuck is wrong with you? You may notice that here they say that you need twice the body weight to weigh down a child, but in the beginning they say that you need 4 times the body weight to weigh down the child. Some people consider this a goof, but considering how drunk the characters are, I am not sure whether to hold that against them. And the merry train keeps on rolling out on the streets singing Cinema, Cinema, making a surprise visit to a lonely husband and wife. And if you've heard of this film, you likely know of this scene. And if you haven't heard of this film, tough luck, I won't show it. All I'll say is it involves 4 men, 1 woman, horrible things happen, and then it gets worse. Unfortunately, there is surprisingly much to talk about with this scene, so I can't really skip past it either. This is pretty much the epicenter of the film. It's the thematic climax and what the character developments have been building up to. This is when the line between observer and participant is fully crossed and the guilt of the camera crew is no longer in question. They become just as culpable as Ben as they join in, and the film's accusations become clear. At first we were laughing, then we were laughing nervously, and now we're quietly crying while the film asks, "Why aren't you laughing? Aren't we having fun?" In that sense, it reminds me of Cannibal Holocaust, in that it has the audience asking how they could even briefly enjoy watching violence. Well, it has you asking those questions if you're a senseless rube. There is a massive difference between entertaining violence and horrifying violence, which the scene demonstrates. Not to mention, most horror files can tell the difference between real and fake. And believe it or not, it's absolutely fine to enjoy violence if it is fake. But with that said, I don't think that's where this movie was going with it. Or at the very least, I don't think it was just there. Rather than asking yourself why you're watching this, contemplate the film crew. In the beginning of the film, they stayed as observers, but by and by, the murders and depravity became normalized to them, to the point of not even seeming criminal. It seems by observing without intervening, the actions become less taboo until the crew finally joins in. After all, weren't they approving from the very beginning by not interfering? There's a lot to be read into this. I mean, after all, haven't you ever come across something that you didn't approve of, but you walked away because you didn't want to get involved? And doesn't that make you complicit? I believe that is the question the movie is really asking. And my thoughts on that later in the review. But it does add another layer of disturbing to the already appalling scene. And it wasn't just the audience that felt uncomfortable about it. The actors themselves, when shooting the scene, they were very queasy about it. Especially Rémi Bellois, who plays himself. He was, even though he helped write the screenplay, he was feeling very uncomfortable about his nude scene. But the actress, Sylviane Godet, I think, helped him. She comforted him enough for him to go through with it. That makes it even worse. Because that's like the victim is assisting and encouraging her assailant. And you would think this is where the movie ends, but no. It's half a damn hour left. What inhumane torture could we even possibly be made to endure at this point? Show it again. Yeah, after that my love for this character has well and truly run dry. But we're stuck with him for another half an hour as the movie makes a 180 in terms of suspense. The scene left me numb to anything that's going on at this point, and even then, nothing all that exciting happens. The movie has made its point, it said what it wanted to say, so now we're stuck watching Benoit just being alive. And more than that, the movie hasn't been following a traditional cliché plot thread of any kind. It's been very experimental and artistic. Because of that, it's been actually very exciting because we were never entirely certain what would happen a few scenes over. We couldn't really predict anything. However, now it decides to start dishing out poetic justice to Benoit. And not only is that not as creative as what we have been given thus far, it's really, really boring and unsatisfying. Having received a fantastic knockout when boxing, Pepe becomes hospitalized over the course of 2 weeks, sharing a room with an incontinent elderly man. And that's why I refuse to work in care homes. When Pepe finally comes home, it's in a neck brace, but he gets a nice comfort prize. It's his birthday and his friends got him a holster. How nice of them. Unfortunately, one of them is a bit obnoxious, Pepe happens to have a gun, the movie has stopped being clever. Yeah, we all see where this is going. Talk about sharing what's on your mind. Or his. So it's business as usual in the world of Pepe, with another corpse to dispose of. Unfortunately, the quarry has drained and all of his other bodies have come to light, meaning they have to bury them in the mud. Mind you, when I say them, I bet even the crew were hoping he'd slip and fall. His injury has yet to heal, which makes his job more difficult than it has to be. Just getting a new mailman is... What the hell is happening?
Mais là, je trouve que c'était toi qui aurais dû intervenir.
For a moment there I thought the movie was pulling a funny games. Pepe feels hamstrung by his neck brace, and it makes him seem more real and human, for murder to be part of his identity. But it doesn't really fit with the first 3/4 of the film.
Pour la dernière fois, Benoît Patard s'est présenté dans le box des accusés, la mine narquoise par-dessus sa minerve.
And suddenly Benoit is out of arrested and standing trial.
Je ne crois pas tout ce qu'on a dit, je ne crois pas. Je n'y crois pas, je t'assure.
Presumably his family, I mean Benoit Poelvoord's actual family, and the real family that is playing characters in the movie without even knowing it. Presumably they still had no idea what kind of movie this was, and his mother actually thought he was in jail. That's really cruel. And just as quickly he escapes. Okay, Franz, you built the Bastille. How difficult was it to keep one guy in subhuman and degrading conditions? The crew are still his friends, as they meet up with him before taking him back to Valerie, who... Wait a minute! Why are they still filming? Presumably their investigation is all kinds of fucked. Even if they omit the slaughter orgy, they can't actually show this to anyone without implicating themselves. So why are they still filming? In his absence, someone has had his family and friends take the punishment they couldn't give him, street justice style. He finds Valerie with a flute shoved up her trumpet, and on his mother they used a broom handle. Every part of his life is crumbling all around him, and all that's left for him to do is leave. Somewhere, anywhere, he doesn't know. Above him in the rafters, a pigeon comes as if to say goodbye, and one last time he recites a poem for the audience.
Tu es vraiment le plus...
Okay. And that's how the movie ends, with an unknown shooter gunning down the crew, and with no one to care but the empty glass eye of the camera. You know, it's actually a really good movie, but it does meander a bit. Let me just say, first of all, I don't agree with the statement this movie attempts to make. The idea of being complicit in tragedy through inaction, and attempting to shame people for it, is meaningless because that would mean every human being on the planet is responsible for every atrocity ever committed. It's pointless to look at things like that, because it's impossible to change, and all it does is make you feel guilty for even existing. All you're doing is telling people they're objectively trash. But the movie did a wonderful job making that statement. Until about halfway through, where it became less a statement and more an excuse to show disturbing things happening. That Christmas massacre orgy scene is where the movie lost me. Partly because that's where the message became an excuse, and partly because nothing that came afterwards was more disturbing. It's a shame because the film felt like it was leading up to something spectacular. While there isn't a typical plot to the film, seeing Benoit's life as a murderous robber was interesting. It didn't explore any deep psychological trauma, and Benoit wasn't a narcissistic megalomaniac. He was just a normal, even charming guy who just happened to have very little respect for human life. It's an interesting way to portray a murderer, and in a way it feels more believable than the self-obsessed loners most horror movies go for. But when the movie had made its point, it ran into the problem of following a realistic character. Most real people are very boring. And without the controversial statement, the movie just wasn't as interesting. Benoit does feel remarkably real, like a person you could meet at work or something. He's rude and insensitive, but lighthearted and fun when he wants to be. When you remember just how little he has against killing you, that can make him really terrifying. But personally, I found him so normal I started compartmentalizing his murders as separate from his person. He didn't feel like his job, if that makes any sense. As for the other characters, the camera didn't stay long enough on them for me to feel anything for them. So when they died, it didn't really affect me. And much like Benoit, when the point had been made, they became little more than furniture. The cinematography is solid, all things considered. It's a mockumentary and filmed as one, as the film crew follows Benoit around in his day-to-day life. It's not faultless. For one, it leaves it very open how the movie was finished when all the characters are dead, but there's nothing obvious enough to immediately break the suspension of disbelief. I'm still not sure why the characters used black and white film. I've read it's for historical authenticity, but this film was made in the 90s and I clearly remember news broadcasts being in color back then. I think it's meant to relay the movie's bleak outlook. Documentaries are supposed to capture life as it happens and then spin a narrative from it. And that opens up a lot of potential for mistakes. Most modern found footage films try to avoid those hurdles, but this used that limitation to further convince you it's real, with several failings in audio and video left in the film. It's fascinating that almost 30 years ago the trailblazers of found footage got this right, when today's filmmakers have trouble keeping track of how many cameras the characters are supposed to have. The biggest crime this movie committed was that it's too long. It would have been better off if it had been wrapped up after the Christmas slaughter orgy, but it just kept going and going for no obvious reason than to fill out the runtime. The acting, editing, visuals, story and message were all excellently performed, but the seemingly pointless last third of the film detracts from the rest of it quite a bit. I give Man Bites Dog a 7 out of 11. I realize that's a point less than I gave Apollo 18, but Apollo 18 knew what kind of movie it was and it stuck with it until the very end. For all its flaws, it knew what it was and it remained faithful to it. Man Bites Dog is in many aspects the superior film, but the one big flaw drag the whole production down as far as I'm concerned. Not to mention, it's one of those artistic movies that tries to say something profound and ends up making a fool out of itself. Thank you all for watching. I have been Core Scratches. And I hope you will see me again next time to take another look at what I found.